Hello, this is the second part of the Everglades, okay? Or Everglades Forever, I'm sorry. We're on page 242, okay? They were out walking in the mangrove last we left off, okay? So let's start at the top of page 242. Follow along, please. The class was too far from the ocean to see a mangrove swamp, but as they walked the Enigna Trail, the students saw several of the Everglades habitats. The slough filled with slow moving water stretched in the distance. A sawgrass prairie covered the shallow parts of the slough, and in the distance, the rounding domes of hardwood hammocks rose above the surface of the water. As the students came to the end of the Enigna Trail, Ranger Jim pointed out a gumbo limbo tree. It's also called the tourist tree, he said, because of the bark the tree peels off, just like the skin of a sunburned tourist. He then directed the students back to the bus for a short ride to pine forest called the Pinelands. Ranger Jim took the class on a hike through the Pinelands, one of the driest habitats in the Everglades. The sunlight filtered through the trees. Everything was quieter than on the Enigma Trail. The floor of the Pinelands is covered with cabbage palms, mulberry bushes, blue porter flowers, and other vegetation that help absorb sounds from the outside world. This is where you'll find solution holes, Miss Stone told the students. They searched the forest for large holes that had been carved out of the limestone by tannic acid, a chemical that formed whenever a rain river mixes with pine needles and other leaves in the forests. Small animals live, feed, and raise their young in these solution holes. The student also watched as a tiny yellow tree snail nested under the bark of a tree, eating a growth on the tree called lichen. They saw a red-shouldered hawk swirl in the sky, and they waited for a golden orb spider to catch its meal in its web close to the ground. As they walked through the Pinelands, the students talked with Miss Stone and Ranger Jim about the circle of life, the Mikulski belief that all plant and human life is connected. They had seen this today in the habitats they had visited. The students also realized how terrible it would be if these habitats in this part of the Everglades were not protected from the efforts of farming development that were still putting the Everglades in danger. What would happen to all the unique plants and animals they had seen? Ranger Jim said they could help by conserving water even when brushing their teeth or washing their faces because most of the water used in southern Florida comes from the Everglades. With responsible water conservation, the Everglades Restoration Plan could, over the next 30 years, restore a healthy balance so all living things, plants, animals, and people will be able to live side by side, only in Pahahiki, grassy river in the world. It was the end of a long day for the class, but there was one more part of the Everglades to visit. Miss Stone and Ranger Jim led the students to an open space hidden at the end of the hiking trail. This is a finger glade, Miss Stone said. It's a small part of the sawgrass prairie that does not stay wet all year. During the wet season, the finger glade would have been filled with water and fish. But now the ground, which is higher from the larger sawgrass prairies, was dry and hard. For a few minutes, you could walk as far as you like and enjoy the finger glade, said Miss Stone. The students fanned out. Some pretended they were birds flying low overhead. Others studied the sawgrass, pretending to be explorers discovering the glade. Still, others talked about how hard the ground on which they were walking would turn into a lake, deep enough for fish to swim during the wet season. And some just lay on their backs looking at the sky and the ring of trees around the glade. When the students came back, they sat in a circle close to Miss Stone. "Close your eyes," said Miss Stone, "and listen." "Do you hear cars?" she whispered. "Do you hear sirens? Do you hear people? What do you hear?" "Silence." "You are not going to find silence like this any place else in the world," Miss Stone said quietly. "This glade is protected by a circle of trees and marsh and natural wildlife. It is far from the noise of the outside world. It is full of silence. Anytime you are in a sawgrass prairie like this one, stop and listen to the silence." The sun was setting over the Everglades as the class walked back to the bus. Birds flew low over the sawgrass prairie. It was a peaceful time, a time for everything to settle down for the night. The students knew that for the near future, the Everglades would look the same and might even be almost the same. They also knew about the dangers facing the Everglades and that it would not stay the same unless people watched over it and took care of it. Restoring the Everglades will take a long time, and it may never be finished. But the students knew that they could play a part as they grew older. They had learned that they were part of the Everglades, connected in the same circle of life with the tiniest insect and the largest alligator. They knew that someday, in the not too distant future, responsibility for the Everglades would pass on to them. They would become the guardians and protectors of the only Everglades in the world, helping this wild and wonderful place go on forever. Okay. So, now we could go to our Dig Deeper, and that's on page 250. And we're talking about the author this time, okay? What's the author's purpose for writing? We've talked about this a lot during the school year. Is the author trying to persuade us to buy something or believe something? Is the author just telling a story just to entertain us? Right? There's people tell stories for lots of different reasons. So, authors of narrative nonfiction, such as Everglades Forever, have a variety of reasons for writing. They may want to share information, describe an event or person, or persuade readers to agree with their positions on an issue. In their writing, they include details such as facts, examples, and descriptions that will help them fulfill their purpose. Okay, so every author has a purpose when they're writing. Just remember that. In Everglades Forever, the author's purpose is to persuade. She wants to convince the readers that it is important to protect the Everglades. She presents her argument and the main points in the form of a narrative about a school field trip. This structure allows her to give reasons and evidence in a way that interests readers. Look through the selection. What are the facts, examples, and other pieces of text evidence that help you convince that the Everglades should be preserved? Okay, so this could be found out throughout the text, okay? Excuse me. The author's purpose they gave you, and that's to persuade, right? She wants to convince the readers that it's important to protect the Everglades. So that's what you would put on the author's purpose. You could find probably more than 2 details. Try to find at least 4 details that show that she's trying to persuade us to conserve the Everglades. Okay, I could find one right now. Even towards the end of the book, it says, they knew that someday in the not too distant future, responsibility for the Everglades would pass on to them. They would become guardians and protectors of the only Everglades in the world, helping this wild and wonderful place go on forever. So she emphasizes that there's nothing like it in the world, right? And it's a wonderful place, and it should go on forever, okay? So that's persuasive language right there. So you could find this throughout the text. Find 4 examples of how she's trying to persuade us that it's important and worthwhile to protect the Everglades, okay? All right, thanks for watching.